I met my husband at a charity event. He was charming, successful, and had a magnetic presence that drew everyone in. He told me he ran a series of legitimate businesses, restaurants, real estate, and import-export ventures. His wealth and success were evident, and he showered me with gifts and attention. We fell in love quickly and got married within a year. For the first few years, our life was like a fairy tale. We lived in a beautiful home, traveled the world, and had 2 wonderful children. I felt blessed and often marveled at how lucky I was. But there were always subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. My husband often took late-night calls and had mysterious meetings. He would disappear for days without explanation, always returning with vague excuses. One evening, while he was away on another business trip, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was urgent, warning me to be careful and to watch my husband closely. They hung up before I could ask any questions, but that call planted a seed of doubt in my mind. I started paying closer attention to my husband's actions. I went through his office and found documents and transactions that didn't add up. There were large sums of money being moved around, and contacts that seemed suspicious. My heart pounded as I began to piece together the truth. My husband wasn't just a businessman, he was involved in drug trafficking. The realization was a punch to the gut. I felt sick, betrayed, and terrified. I confronted him when he returned, and he didn't deny it. Instead, he became menacing, warning me to stay out of his business if I knew what was good for me and the children. I was trapped. Leaving him wasn't an option. He had connections everywhere, and I feared what he might do if I tried to escape. Living under the same roof as a man who was now a stranger to me was a nightmare. I lived in constant fear for my life and the lives of my children. I kept up the facade of a perfect family, all the while planning how to protect my kids and find a way out. One night, things took a turn for the worse. My husband came home furious, ranting about a deal gone wrong. He was more volatile than ever, and I knew it was only a matter of time before his anger turned towards us. I had to act. I reached out to the anonymous caller who had warned me months ago. It turned out to be an old friend of him who had connections with law enforcement. They helped me formulate a plan to get out safely. It was a risky move, but I was desperate. With their help, I gathered evidence of my husband's illegal activities and handed it over to the authorities. In the meantime, I prepared to flee. One night, while my husband was out, I packed up the essentials, grabbed my children, and left the house we had once called home. We were placed in a safe house, our identities protected. The authorities promised to take down my husband's operation, but it would take time. The man I had loved and trusted was gone, replaced by a criminal I barely recognized. But more importantly, my children and I were free, yet we were also living in constant fear of being found by him. The weeks turned into months, and slowly, the news trickled in. My husband's whereabouts is still unknown. To make matters worse, I started receiving anonymous phone calls from numbers traced back to Colombia. The callers never spoke, but their silence was haunting. It was a clear message. They knew where we were, and they were watching. The fear that I had managed to keep at bay returned with a vengeance. I lived in constant anxiety, wondering if each day would be the one when they finally came for us. I'd listened to a similar story on this channel,